Okay, let's unpack this. We're doing a deep dive today into something incredibly subtle, but I think fundamentally transformative. It's happening in modern leadership, particularly within, contexts of ministry and service. It's this quiet shift from talking about a divine calling to, well, discussing a professional career.
Right.
Our sources suggest this is, it's more than just a change in vocabulary. It's a profound shift in the internal logic.
Yes.
So our mission is to understand how these institutional pressures, metrics, visibility, org charts, things common to literally any profession, have started to redefine the core identity of a faithful leader.
And that's the question.
Yeah,
What happens when the sacred work of discernment starts taking its cues from, say, LinkedIn?
exactly.
And that's the crux of it. This isn't an exploration meant to condemn professionalism itself. I mean, structure and training are good things,
Of course.
but we have to face the unsettling core truth. Ministry didn't stop being sacred when it became professionalized. It just became immensely vulnerable.
Vulnerable how?
Vulnerable to systems that reward the wrong things. We start favoring, polish over presence, growth over grounding, and crucially, performance over formation.
That's a powerful phrase, performance over formation.
It is. And this isn't about throwing out excellence. It's a necessary recalibration for every leader listening to this, asking, what does being well look like in biblical terms versus simply being successful in modern ones?
So let's dig into the origin story of this shift because it was imperceptible. At some point, church organizations and ministry leaders began speaking the language of resumes. We started seeing job descriptions replace spiritual discernment, and performance reviews began to stand in for spiritual fruit. The fundamental identity shifted from a calling to be discerned to a career to be managed and built.
And importantly, this didn't arise out of malice. There was no conspiracy. It really arose from necessity.
Right, practicality.
Yes, think about the history of organizational growth. As churches grew larger, more complex, managing budgets, staff, facilities, they had to adopt organizational logic. They just did.
They needed a system.
They adopted the managerial structures that became common across the West, which really emphasized specialization, measurable results, and, of course, efficiency.
So training, structure, credentials,
Mm-hmm.
they became essential tools for just basic safety and governance.
Absolutely. But the tragedy happens when that structure, that professionalism starts operating without its theological grounding. When the logic of covenant, which is about relationship and faithfulness, is quietly replaced by the logic of career, which is all about attainment and ascent.
So if necessity drove this, what's the unintended cost?
Our sources point to what they call the paradox of professionalized ministry.
Yeah, this is key.
We see leaders preparing more, producing more, and achieving more in terms of measurable output than ever before. Yet at the same time, they feel profoundly less anchored internally. Why is that? It's because the systems we've built are highly efficient at producing skilled communicators, strategic planners, and brilliant administrators. They teach you competence.
That's a lot.
Exactly. But they are far less effective at cultivating the kind of spiritual authority that is rooted in obscurity, or the obedience that is shaped in silence, or the resilience that is forged through surrender and failure, not just success.
Wow. That is a phenomenal distinction. So readiness shifts from being an internal formed state to an external demonstrated ability.
Precisely. And when that happens, readiness becomes what the sources describe as rehearsed competence rather than character under continuous formation.
Rehearsed competence.
Rehearsed competence is what you present in a job interview. Character under formation is what carries you through a 6-month crisis when no one is watching. The central question for leader placement quietly shifts from who is this person becoming before God to the highly functional, what is this person prepared to deliver in the next quarter?
That sounds exhausting even before we get to the metrics.
It is. Because you've shifted from relying on internal spiritual resources to relying on external performance validation.
So let's pivot to that, the logic of metrics and visibility, because this is where the system really takes hold of your identity. In what our sources call the age of measurable ministry, numbers, attendance, giving, social reach, likes, views, they subtly transform from being just data points into moral indicators.
This is a huge shift. Faithfulness, which is supposed to be internal and consistent, gets replaced by faith performance, which is external and measurable.
And obedience is no longer evaluated by consistency in the hidden life,
but by quantifiable outcomes.
I found the example in the notes about tracking online engagement so fascinating because it's so relatable. You post a message or a video, If it gets 500 views, that's celebrated. It's affirmation.
It feels like divine approval.
Yes. But if the next one only gets 50 views, it causes real internal anxiety, not just strategic disappointment. That's because the metric has become a surrogate for divine approval, right?
Precisely. If the worth of the action is tied to the public outcome, then your anxiety is perfectly rational within that career logic. You are only as good as your last engagement report.
The spiritual danger, then, is that you stop asking, was this faithful?
And you start only asking, was this effective? Or worse, was this visible?
Now, hand in hand with metrics are credentials. I want to challenge this point for a second because we all agree credentials are necessary, right? Degrees, ordinations, licenses, they signal competence, they provide accountability.
Sure, they do.
So where does the line get crossed where these necessary tools become, I guess, substitutes?
That's a great question, and we absolutely need structure. Credentials are vital tools, but they become substitutes when we mistakenly believe spiritual authority flows primarily from paper and pedigree, rather than from tested character and faithfulness.
So when we equate a high capacity for learning with spiritual maturity,
That's it. The line gets crossed when the degree becomes the prerequisite for calling, rather than the stewardship of gifts. Look at the biblical pattern. Calling often preceded credentials, dramatically so. Moses was a shepherd for decades. Amos was a farmer. The first apostles were simple fishermen, not graduates of the rabbinic schools. God called people into a process where sufficiency was formed through long obedience, often in hidden places, not accumulated through certificates.
So we're talking about competence versus character. The church needs competent leaders, but competency alone, without that root system of character, actually makes failure more catastrophic.
That's right. And this entire logic is resisted throughout Scripture. Think about Jeremiah. By all visible metrics, attendance, popularity, influence, he was a catastrophic failure.
Yeah, total fit.
His audience mocked him. They hated his message. Yet he is consistently upheld as faithful. His visible success did not negate his faithfulness to the message God gave him.
Or Jesus.
Or consider Jesus. In John chapter 6, when his teaching became costly and challenging, he lost followers. People literally walked away. But that didn't prompt him to immediately adjust his message to boost engagement numbers.
He didn't check the analytics.
No, his truth was independent of the outcome. And Paul, the most credentialed man among the apostles, famously boasted not in his academic pedigree, but in his perseverance through weakness, suffering, and hardship, things that will look terrible on a professional resume.
When you look at those biblical figures, they demonstrate a profound inner resilience. That is, well, it's impossible if your identity is tied to external metrics. Let's talk about that inner cost on leaders when ministry truly becomes a career path.
The cost is profound. When ministry becomes just another career, your identity begins to migrate directly into the role. Success no longer feels simply good, it feels salvific.
Salvific, as in it saves you.
Meaning success feels like it proves your intrinsic worth and validates your existence. Conversely, failure no longer feels like a setback, it feels existential, like a threat to your very being, not just your job title.
And when the stakes are that high, you have to manage perception. You learn to perform strength while suppressing weakness, suppressing doubt. That is the express train to burnout and that unspoken exhaustion we see everywhere.
And this is where the theological depth just collapses. We see the rise of what is known as functional atheism.
Okay, what is that?
This is not about outright disbelief in God. It's about how we choose to operate daily. When success is defined primarily by human strategy, branding, skill, or budget management, reliance on God is subtly minimized.
So that sounds like a leader who has stopped asking for spiritual direction and instead just relies on strategic execution.
Exactly. The leader becomes highly organized, highly effective, and skilled in execution. But they are disconnected from the source of the calling. Their relentless productivity replaces genuine spiritual discernment.
It's the difference between planning a meeting because you've prayed and sensed direction.
Versus planning a meeting because the quarterly goals demand certain programming.
And that connects directly to the temptation of control disguised as stewardship. Professional systems love predictability. They love measurable results. So we build processes that minimize risk and that, well, minimize the need for divine intervention.
It leads to the leader prioritizing control over trust and efficiency over true obedience. This is how we end up avoiding the very acts of courage and faith that Scripture models.
Like Abraham leaving home.
Think about Abraham leaving his home for an unknown destination, or Moses leading millions into a wilderness with no logical supply chain. Our professional logic would screen both of those acts as irresponsible and inefficient.
Absolutely. The risk assessment would be off the charts.
The systems we design today are almost designed to eliminate the need for waiting or obscurity or vulnerability. Yet those are the very conditions under which character is forged and true spiritual authority emerges. We need to remember God doesn't often work on an optimized timeline.
The antidote here is critical, and it must be hammered home because it reverses the priority. Identity must be anchored in belovedness, not usefulness. The order matters profoundly. In the gospel, "You are my beloved," always precedes, "You will be my witnesses." A resume can describe your experience, but only communion with God can provide the foundation for your identity.
So if we look for the biblical corrective, what does true readiness look like? It looks less like polish and much more like posture.
Posture, I like that.
It is forged through intentional practices that will never accelerate a career. Obedience in obscurity, faithfulness without public recognition, submission before demanding leadership. It's the readiness of Samuel learning to recognize the divine voice, or Mary, who embraced an unpredictable calling by saying, "Let it be to me according to your word."
So let's use the source material to synthesize this into a practical diagnostic tool, the comparison between Acts leadership and modern resumes.
Okay.
If you're a leader today, your resume primarily values academic credentials, strategic planning, and a demonstrable growth track record.
Yeah.
It focuses on output.
Right, what you can do.
Exactly. Now look at the leadership qualities that are truly valued in the book of Acts. They prioritize spirit-filled obedience, faithfulness in small relational contexts, and notably, a complete willingness to suffer for the cause.
That's a big one.
We see this vividly in Acts chapter 6, the selection of the first deacons. The need arose, a logistical and relational crisis, and the apostles didn't ask for the most academically qualified men or the best strategists.
No, they didn't. They asked the community to select leaders full of the Spirit and of wisdom. Communal discernment of character was prioritized over professional qualifications.
The key takeaway is powerful then because it balances competence and calling.
It does. Skills are affirmed as gift to steward think of Bezalel's craftsmanship in Exodus 31, a divine gift for construction. But competence must be integrated with humility and servant leadership. We must ensure that skill serves calling, and not the reverse.
Where the calling just becomes a platform to showcase a pre-existing skill set.
Precisely.
So to be clear, the solution isn't to dismantle all structure or to stop getting trained or to abandon excellence.
Absolutely not. The solution is to subordinate those things. We must recognize the hierarchy. Structure must serve formation. Metrics must serve insight and honest accountability, not validation. And career paths must ultimately serve a higher vocation.
So when we put professionalism back in its proper place,
It becomes a holy scaffolding that supports the work, rather than a shaky, counterfeit foundation that holds up the leader's ego.
this deep dive has really been about gaining release. Release from definitions of success that drain and exhaust you, rather than genuinely enliven you. It requires having the courage to actively choose formation over performance, even when that choice is unseen, unnoticed, and unrewarded by the professional systems you operate within.
And ministry thrives when leaders prioritize simply abiding in God, trusting His guidance, and embracing obedience, even when that obedience defies standard professional efficiency or human recognition. True, sustained effectiveness in this work is always rooted in character, humility, and long-term formation, not just momentary competency.
And so we leave you with a final provocative thought to carry forward from this deep dive. It's a moment of reflection we encourage you to sit with. If visible success, your metrics, your credentials, your title, and your platform were stripped away today, what would remain of your ministry identity?